And we're back. It's the bullshit filter
Yay.
for May
Yeah.
2025.
Yes.
How are you, my little pocket-sized American DEI hire?
I'm a lot of things. I'm excited. I'm afraid. I'm afraid of losing love. I'm afraid of being loved. But it doesn't matter because there's going to be nuclear war soon, and I'll just be a pile of ash to dust.
People who say to me, send me email, say, why are you so mean to Ray? I say, because I know Ray better than anybody.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I know that
Yeah.
that's what he responds
We
to.
refer.
That's how I show him that I love him.
My family refers to Cam as Cam hurts so good, Riley. So it's all good. There's love behind the wax.
That's so good.
Anyway,
This week, or this month, this episode, I want to talk about a very exciting topic. I'm sure everyone will be super excited about the World Trade Organization. But what are we bullshitting on? Like Trump's tariffs thing. The whole tariffs situation and the whole situation in terms of global trade. I've been following this, obviously, as we all are, but, I do the investing show with Tony. Been following the whole tariffs thing for the last few months as it's collapsed the stock markets, which recovered a little bit for unknown reasons because it's still completely fucking bonkers.
Yeah.
But, I had questions as I was digesting the news in the first few weeks, which led me down paths of investigation and inquiry, as is my wont. Lots of time spent driving around, talking to ChatGPT, going, explain this to me. How does that work? What's going on with this? And then taking ChatGPT's answers and dropping them into Gemini and Grok and saying, does this make sense? And so, if you listen to your esteemed president, congratulations on the election of the first American Pope today.
Thank
too.
You. Chicago boy.
Ray.
Yes. There's also another thing you should be congratulating me. Trump announced today that we have an agreement with the U.K., a trade agreement. So 1 down, 199 to go. Very excited about this. So things are rolling the U.S.A. way, if you know what I'm saying.
And to be crystal clear, they don't have a trade agreement.
No,
They've got an idea that they might do something about trade. Yeah, that's all he's got to announce.
So,
a concept.
But you know what we had?
Details. Don't worry about the details. We'll work out the details.
You know what we had? We had an announcement.
If we also
had an announcement. That's what.
An announcement, yeah. If we have time today, I also want to touch on India and Pakistan. I want to touch on the Ukraine minerals deal. I want to touch. I want to get touched. I always want to get touched. I want you to touch it. Can't touch this. Won't touch this.
For $20.
Act Blue.
Right, yes.
Trump's attack on Act Blue and what that means for the midterms. But let's see how we go with time. Trump likes to use the word unfair a lot. As I've said before, Trump manages to walk this tightrope, which is on one hand, he's the greatest person who ever lived, greatest businessman, greatest president, greatest television host, greatest everything. Yeah. On the other hand, people are really mean to him all the time. People treat him really unfairly. And it's the same with the United States. The United States is the greatest country, the most successful country, the best country. On the other hand, countries are really mean to the United States and they're treated really unfairly and, et cetera, et cetera.
I concur.
That sort of cognitive dissonance doesn't really put off Trump's chumps, as I like to call them.
That.
The chumps that believe in Trump. They go, yeah, well, that makes total sense to me. But it's really the preeminent superpower in the world for the last 75 years has been treated unfairly and meanly by other countries.
Ripped off.
Like, you stop and think about that for half a second. If you know anything about history or geopolitics, you know that that's not. It's the opposite of what's been going on since World War II.
We're the bullies.
The U.S. has been the world's bully for the last 75 years. It's not that they're being treated unfairly, but of course, most Americans don't know anything about history and give a fuck about history, so he gets away with it. He's talking about ripping them off Let's etc. And I have had emails from people who seem to agree with him. I've had emails from listeners saying, "Well, Trump's got a point.
Yeah.
Really,
if you think about it,
look at the trade deficit with China."
Yeah.
And it's a load of bollocks, though. And I have to explain to them, it's a load of bollocks. And if you think that Trump has a point, yeah, you're a moron. And I'm going to explain why in this episode.
Could I just add on to that real quick? As an American, and as you know, we are hyper focused on things outside of our country. We're experts on practically everything. There's been, ever since Trump came into office the second time, and also the first time, but certainly this time, there's been so much, all the crap about the tariffs on and off, increased, decreased, on pause, back on. It's been so crazy. And I'm embarrassed to admit this, but it's true. It's been so crazy. Sometimes you forget. And I would wager that most Americans did not know in the first place, so they could forget that things like this are supposed to be either to go through the WTO or to have influence or whatever, but we're just unilaterally just boom, boom, boom. So the point is, it's like even what we're doing with all this shit, all this stuff with the tariffs, he's not even supposed to be doing that in the first place. And again, I know it sounds crazy, but if you tell that to the average American, he's supposed to go through this organization, they would go, really? Because that doesn't sound right. And it doesn't to us. We should be able to do whatever we want. But I know, again, I just wanted to add that layer of, I don't want to say stupidity, but unknowledge, if I could.
Unknowledge. Wow. You don't want to say stupidity, but you want to say, just make up words like unknowledge. That's such a
If an American does it, it can't be wrong. So,
Wow, you look so sexy, Lisa.
Before we get into this, though, speaking of things happening outside of the world, I should have started with this. We had a federal election in Australia last weekend, where we get to choose our federal government. And I actually, leading up to it, I had not one, but two messages from our listeners, American listeners, paying attention to it, watching the debates, knowing who the candidates were. I was like, fuck me, Americans paying attention to stuff outside of America. That's fascinating. Well done. Interestingly, so we have the two major parties here, of course, are the Labor Party, the ALP, the Australian Labor Party, been around since the dawn of time, and the Liberal National Coalition, two parties, the Liberal Party and the National Party, that neither of which have any chance of ever forming government by themselves. So they formed a coalition decades ago. National Party sort of represents a lot of rural districts. They're sort of farmers, agriculture. Liberal Party tends to be cities, conservative. So the Liberal Party, confusing still to Chrissy after all these years of living here, the Liberal Party in Australia is the ultra-conservative party. The Labor Party supposedly is the union-backed working-class party. In reality, they're not. They're a centre-left, barely to the left, but mostly a centre party these days. Moved very much to the right in the last 30 years. So so the Labor Party had been in government for the last 3 or 4 years. The guy who was running for Prime Minister against the Labor Party, so the Prime Minister is a guy called Albanese, but just referred to in Australia as Albo. Everyone calls our Prime Minister Albo. Anthony Albanese, we just call him Albo because who could be fucked saying Albanese? The guy running against him was called Peter Dutton, and he's a local guy. His office is in the suburb next to mine. He's a Brisbane candidate. Anyway, for the last year or two, because we've got a lot of housing price issue, cost of living issue here, a lot of anger at our government from the left about their support for the genocide in Gaza and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I, along with a lot of people, kind of assumed that Peter Dutton would win, and this big swing to sort of the ultra-right, the alt-right that's been happening around the world up until recently. Everyone assumed Dutton was probably had a good chance to win. And also, we haven't had a single prime minister in this country last more than one term in over 20
Right.
years. We have very low tolerance for prime ministers. So anyway, but then Trump's tariffs happened. So Peter Dutton was trying to kind of align himself with Trump and MAGA.
Ooh,
He was like, oh yeah, I'm jumping on this gravy train. This is beautiful. And then the tariffs happened, and he was like, oh, Trump, who? Never heard of him. Too late, son. Not only did he lose our election, but he lost his own seat, which he'd held for 24 years. So he's
Wow.
out of politics. He can't even be the leader of the party. They have to get a new leader.
Jesus.
And the Labor Party won in a landslide.
Yeah.
So it was the lowest primary vote that the Liberal Party, I think, has had since their founding in 1944 or whatever it was. So it was a complete rejection in Australia by Australians of Trumpism, MAGA, the alt-right.
Extremism.
The Liberals lost a ton of
Right.
seats, like even seats like his that were safe
Yeah.
seats
Yeah.
that, his party had held. I mean, he had a small margin on his seat, but he had held it for decades. Gone to the
like
Labor
Canada.
Party. So, yeah, like Canada. So it was interesting, like the way that other countries that have been sliding to the right for decades are now looking at the US and going,
Ooh.
"Oh fuck,
We
yeah,
were just-
we don't want to become
We were-
that." Hold on, whoa,
we were
whoa,
just
whoa, whoa.
cosplaying.
Slow
Yeah,
it
we
down.
didn't mean it. This fucker means it. No,
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
no. Yeah,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah,
What's
yeah.
the opposite of the Midas touch? Is that the shitty touch? Because because remember when Trump,
The cheese touch.
when he was in office the first time, he lost both houses. He lost the presidency. I mean, just whatever this guy, because eventually the reality or the truth or whatever catches up to him. And then if you watch him long enough, you're like, oh, I can see the patterns now. You're full of shit. You're lying. You're whatever. And people just, they're done with, and whatever, to a degree, they're done with it.
Yeah. So it was, as Tony said, it was a heartwarming result to see Australians en
Yes.
masse go, yeah, nah.
No,
Yeah, nah,
yeah,
mate.
nah.
Nah.
Yeah, nah. Yeah.
Don't fucking think so, mate.
Not on my watch.
Yeah, nah. So at least, I mean, these things, as I keep reminding people, don't go pissing on the Liberals' grave just yet, because I remember when Obama won.
Right.
And everyone was like, that's the end of the GOP. Republicans are done. Demographics have changed.
Nope.
Blacks, Latinos, young people, women. The Republicans are never recovering from this. They're over. And they just went further to the right. And the Democrats dropped the fucking ball. They didn't help the working class.
Exactly.
They didn't get shit done. Obamacare was watered down. They didn't get shit done. Hope and change turned out to be not so much. And the GOP managed to reinvent itself and get the working class vote, enough
Made
of it to win.
promises.
So
Yeah.
these things are, it's never necessarily the end. But I did read, there's a lot of analysis here. The Liberals here haven't won. They don't get, they're only demographic they're still leading in is men over the age of 55.
That's
I would say white men, but it doesn't really, that's the only kind we have here really of any significant numbers. So
Right.
they have men over the age of 55, which are dying off in large numbers, obviously. They lose every other demographic and have done for the last two elections now. Anyone under the age of 55, both genders, women across the board. So people are saying, well, they're fucked and they're done as a political entity, but we'll see.
Right.
Okay, back to the World Trade Organization and Trump's, they're so unfair. So, as you pointed out, the first question you should have when you hear about Trump complaining about tariffs and trade deficits is, well, why aren't they taking it to the World Trade Organization? That's what it was set up for. It was set up in 1995 to sort of replace, modernize GATT, not GATT, as the kids say.
Thank God.
GATT.
Right. Yeah, that would not work.
But the GATT, every time my kids go, GATT, I'm like, oh, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. Yeah,
They're
let's
like,
talk
no.
about it and how it evolved into the World Trade. And they're like, the fuck are you talking about,
They
old
want to
man?
harass or his, I don't know.
GATT was set up largely by the United States after World War II, 1947, to regulate and facilitate international trade. It was sort of modernized in 1995 as the World Trade Organization. Yeah. Its job is basically to govern international trade. It's not part of the UN, but it does it sort of, it's like the trade version of the UN, you know, to make sure that everyone's playing nicely. Yeah. And if you have a gripe with another country,
well,
you take it to the WTO and you resolve it through diplomacy instead of trade war, economic warfare. As the United Nations was set up to say, listen, if you've got a gripe with a country, come to the global community. We'll sit down at the tables like adults, like civilized human beings, and we'll talk about it and we'll work something out.
Because
don't just invade. Don't just blow shit up. That's
exactly, because the whole point of this is to avoid World War III, because money matters. And, you know, after World War II, when colonies are busted up, these new countries are floundering at first. Let's level the playing field just a little bit for these people. Let them catch up, you know, not catch up, but, you know, do better. So they're basically trying to avoid war. And so if you have a problem, like you said, come to the table, let's talk. That's why we're here. And of course, the great ironic part of all this is that, like you said, mostly set up by the United States and the Western powers, the people that won World War II minus Soviet Russia. So now they have a problem with their own creation.
Well, it turns out the U.S.A. can't really protest to the World Trade Organization about China. Right. Or any other country, because the USA deliberately broke the World Trade Organization about 8 years ago and has refused to fix it ever since. They broke it to stop it from working, which you don't hear talked about a lot in the media. The media has covered it, but when you read about tariffs, you read about trade deficits, you read about all this kind of stuff, the headline should always be, well, we could have taken this to the World Trade Organization if the Trump and Biden administrations hadn't deliberately cut its dick off and shoved it in its mouth over the last 8 years. But that's exactly what they did.
Or you should start every sentence with, if it wasn't for America, we could be taking this to this body. We could be getting help. We could be getting assistance resolutions or whatever, or at least a chance to have our case put before, you know, a global organization. But like you said, the Americans knew exactly what they're doing. And we're going to explain this in just a second, but they're like, we can't destroy the WTO, but how can we make it practically so it can't do anything? And it turns out there's a way to do that.
Yeah. But before we get too far into that, you know, I think it's important that we talk about the history of US-China relations and trade and how we got here. Because the other thing that I hear a lot from people is, oh, it's unfair. The trade deficit is unfair. They sell us lots of stuff. They don't buy a lot of stuff from us. That's unfair. And I'm always like, is it though? Like, is it unfair?
Everybody's getting something.
You know, well, the basic analogy that I use, you know, I've found it helpful over the years to, when you have a complicated issue that deals with geopolitics, a good way to think about it is to reduce it down to a smaller analogy that is easy to get your head around. And, you know, Tony, when we started doing QAV, my investing show, Tony really helped me get my head around the concepts of value investing by simplifying it down to the idea of a coffee shop. The analogy we still use today is a coffee shop. So imagine there's a coffee shop in your neighborhood and the people there want to raise some investment and they come to you and they offer you a share of the coffee shop. What are the questions that you would ask? What are the things that would be important before you decided to invest in this coffee shop? And we use that as a way to think about share investing, stock investing, right? because the principles are the same. It's just writ large. Oh, fuck, I've got to stop hitting the microphone. Writ
Right,
large.
exactly.
When you think about it in terms of buying a share in a billion-dollar company. So the trade deficit thing, I always think about, so you got two shops. Let's say I've got a jewelry shop where I make fancy jewelry. And on the other side of the street, you've got a coffee shop. You sell coffee and pastries and donuts and shit like that. And I go to your shop every day and I buy a coffee, and I buy coffees for my staff and all my staff. You make really good coffee. We love your coffee. It's well priced. It's good coffee, good barista. Pastries are freshly made hot cinnamon donuts. You can't beat a hot cinnamon. Took Fox out for donuts the other day, and he wanted to buy one of these expensive fucking bullshitty things that's full of shit and covered, which are trendy here. I'm sure they are over there too, but they've become really trendy here in the last 10 years. $10 for a fucking donut that tastes like shit.
That.
And I was like, dude, trust me. I'm going to take you to a place. So there was a place where a guy was just making basic cinnamon donuts in front of you, freshly made, hot cinnamon sugar donuts. I was like, trust me, this is the fucking gold standard of donut. You don't want any other donut. Have one of these. You'll never, because we don't eat a lot of donuts, right? Trust me, once you've had one of these, you'll never go back. This is like, sex with a black girl. You'll never go back. No. Racist.
It's pro-racist.
So
go ahead with you.
I bought a half a dozen, and he had one. He was like, "Oh fuck yeah, this is good." So I don't know how I got into that.
Donuts.
You make good donuts in your coffee shop.
Do you want to know the secret? Nutmeg. I just put
stick your dick in the hole.
Okay, two secrets. I put nutmeg in everything. It just.
I thought you were going to say you nut on them or something.
I'm done. Anyway, thank you for coming to my shop. Yeah.
So here's my analogy for trade deficits. I have a jewelry shop on one very, very fancy, custom designed jewelry. Very expensive, very nice, very fancy. You have a coffee shop across the road. You make really good coffee, really good fresh donuts, some other pastries, some sandwiches. Every day I go to your shop first thing in the morning. I buy a coffee for myself and also half a dozen for my staff. I buy box of donuts. I buy, for a healthy breakfast. I take them back. You go, we have a thing. I go back at lunchtime, buy some more coffees for the staff, buy a bunch of freshly made chicken, turkey, rye sandwiches, wholemeal, whole grain bread. They're freshly made, delicious, well priced. Take them back.
With love.
Come back in the afternoon, lagging a bit, 3:30. Need another coffee. Buy another half a dozen coffees. Bye bye.
Right.
At the end of the year, I go, wow, I've spent $5,000 on coffees and donuts and sandwiches at Ray's shop. Wonder how much very, very fancy jewelry Ray has bought from my shop. And I look at it, and you did buy one piece of jewelry for your wife for her birthday, but it was like $500. And I go over to you and I say, Ray, what the fuck, dude? I spent $5,000 on coffees and donuts. You bought one piece of jewelry. And you go, well, I only have one wife. I mean, I have mistresses, but I'm not going to be blowing $500 on jewelry for my mistresses. I'm not going to buy 10 necklaces for my wife every year. Exactly. So, and honestly, she didn't really like it. She was like,
I gave it to the mistress.
It's all right, but that was it. I thought I'd get it.
Yeah. No, but you're right. Yeah, it's way too much. Yeah.
So what do I do? Do I go, well, fuck you. I'm not going to buy coffees from you anymore. I can't. You're the only coffee shop in my area. I'm not going to travel 20 minutes to get a coffee. You're the only coffee shop across the road. So I'm going to keep buying your coffees. But so I'm going to go, you know what? I'm going to put a tariff on your coffees now. If my staff want to buy your coffee, I'm going to make them pay me. I reckon it's about 5 times the price, 10 times, because that's how I get balance of trade. So instead of a coffee costing $5, every time they bring in a coffee from your shop, I'm going to say, you have to pay me $45 now on top of that coffee for $5 because that's how I'm going to balance the trade. And same with the donuts and same with the sandwiches. Like, that makes no sense. It's just not a rational way of and you say to me, well, listen, I'm happy to spend more money if that's, but get cheaper stuff, diversify, not
Give
just
me
jewelry.
something.
Set up a brothel. Set up a brothel, and I'll come and I'll drop money.
I will come over
on
and
hookers every day.
I'll come twice. Yeah, no. I'm here to support you. Yeah.
When you boil it down to a simplistic analogy, the rationale of we buy this amount of stuff, you don't buy as much from us, makes no sense. Right. Anywho, so it's that, like, let's talk about the history of the US and China. And we mentioned the World Trade Organization before. So the entire global trading system was set up primarily by the United States, engineered by the United States after World War II, like all of the other international post-World War II organizations, the United Nations, the World Bank, the IMF, the World Health Organization, the International Criminal Court, World Court, etc., etc.
Benefit us, but go ahead.
These were all post-World War II organizations engineered by the United States when it was the world's preeminent, dominant superpower. I would say the only superpower, really. The Soviet Union was around and it had some weight and it got some nuclear weapons, but really they were broke as fuck.
Right.
So, it was really the US running the show. The Soviets weren't really a real threat.
Exactly. Powerhouse.
Yeah, I mean, they were positioned as a real threat by the US and the UK, but they weren't really. We know that today because we have history. We have knowledge of what was really going on in the country. Mm-hmm. So the US designed the system primarily to perpetuate and increase its economic and military dominance around the world. The US dollar was set up at the Bretton Woods Conference as the global reserve currency for the non-Soviet Union Warsaw Pact countries. Mm-hmm. And that enabled the US basically to get free financing for the last 75 years, run up massive debts around the world because people would keep any debt issued by the United States in forms of treasuries would get snapped up by countries around the world who needed to spend American dollars anyway because they, particularly in China, were bringing a lot of it in.
Good as gold.
And they needed to get rid of it and they needed to buy debt, and the US was seen as a stable place to buy debt. So it meant the US could effectively issue as much debt as it wanted over the last 75 years. And then it was sort of not a vicious circle, but a self-sustaining cycle where the US could raise a shit ton of money, use a lot of that money to build military bases around the world and fund and finance those military bases to make sure that it remained the dominant economic and military superpower in the world, which meant it could raise more money, which meant it could buy more military, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Beautiful thing.
There was a very, very smart idea. Very, very smart system that they set up. But, they thought it would last forever, and it didn't. And China, predominantly, Russia to a lesser extent, but China has caught up to the US economically and militarily, almost, give or take, depending on what sort of metrics you look at. And now the US is like, well, fuck these international organizations that we set up. Now they're using them against us. They were never supposed to be used against us.
That wasn't part of the plan.
And our allies.
No, that wasn't in the playbook.
No, fuck them. We don't believe in international organizations
not anymore.
And again, it's not just the Trump MAGA crowd, because the Biden administration for 4 years did nothing to fix the world court either, because they and they also said fuck the ICC. If you criticize Netanyahu, you try and do anything against the leadership of Israel for the genocide they're committing in Gaza, we'll come at you, we'll come after you. They ignored all of the calls to end the genocide in Gaza and the UN Security Council. It's both sides don't give a fuck about these international organizations. The World Health Organization, maybe slightly a little bit less, but really it's a bipartisan thing to a large extent in the US.
I just love the fact that Americans can come together when we're not able to fleece other countries. That's the one time we're patriots. We come together. There are no differences between Democrats and Republicans, and we will try to screw foreigners together, hand in hand. That's the one time when things are beautiful here, when there's an outside threat to our money.
Yeah, you need an enemy. And it's not just me saying this either. Martin Sandbu, who is the European economics commentator for the Financial Times, I was reading an article he wrote recently. He said, it shouldn't need to be said, but it bears emphasizing that these are its own creatures that the US is abandoning. The whole edifice of the democratic post-war order, in opposition to the undemocratic one established by the Soviet Union, was largely of Washington's design and fully of its making.
Yes. Yeah.
So, all of this bitching that you hear about China flooding the world with cheap goods, guess who set up China to do that in the first place? Guess who invented the model of China being the world's factory?
How many guesses do I get?
You need to phone a friend.
Get Tony.
It was Uncle Sam, right? Uncle Sam set it up. And as I'll explain, it was a bipartisan thing that they wanted to offshore everything they could to China and turn China into what it's become. But China, this whole thing about, China's using its power to tip the scales on how global trade happens, et cetera, state-sponsored capitalism, it's not fair, et cetera. Remember the Marshall Plan? We've done many shows on the Marshall Plan. We've talked about the Marshall Plan. What was the point of the Marshall Plan, Ray?
It was to let them know that we are with you politically, but also to try to stimulate their economy to get it back going again. But it was a good faith. It was a very expensive good faith measure on our part to infuse money in them, but mostly so they come into our fold. They have to go by our rules, and that's a beautiful thing.
So bullshit. It wasn't a good faith. It wasn't an aid thing. It was two things. Number one, it was the greatest transfer of wealth in history from the taxpayer to American corporations. $13 billion in $1950 of money that went from the U.S. Treasury. Taxpayer money goes to the U.S. Treasury. The U.S. Treasury provided it largely as a line of credit to Western European countries to buy American goods and services from American corporations. So the money went from taxpayers' pockets to the Treasury, from the Treasury to American corporations. Didn't go to Europe. It went straight into the pockets of American corporations. A little bit of it, but about 70% of it went to American businesses. Just straight into their bank accounts. Thank you, la-di-da, easy money. But the other side of it, the smart side of it was to get Western countries using American goods and services so they would become addicted. It was basically giving a packet of cigarettes to an 8-year-old.
Here you go, Johnny.
And making, remember the brand, Johnny? Remember
Lucky
the brand.
Strikes. I don't know.
Because if you buy American farm equipment, if you buy American machinery for your factory, if you buy American computers or American food, or, some of those things have a fairly long lifeline, and then you buy parts and you're trained on those things. It's the way they get them with NATO, right? You get countries in NATO countries to buy American weapon systems. Then you're trained on American weapon systems, and you need to stick with American weapon systems because the other weapon systems don't integrate with the American weapon systems. And it's like the razor blade business model, right? You sell the razor cheap, get people addicted to it, then they keep buying the razor
Right.
blades. Or, in my software Microsoft days 30 years ago, we would call it the lock-in, right? You get people using Windows and all of their staff are trained in Windows. You have to keep buying Windows. If you're going to move to a different operating system or a different office suite or whatever it is, it's a whole fucking thing. Training and security and it's expensive, it's difficult, it's messy, it's easier just to keep buying the same thing that you're familiar with. And the US wanted to do that to stop the Soviet countries, the Warsaw Pact countries, from supplying Western European countries with products and services made there. It was to cripple the Soviet economy even further than it was already crippled after World War I and World War II and a civil war and all that kind of stuff. But it was also a way of making goods and services cheap. It was using US economic power and military power to buy basically Western European markets and lock them into the US system. China starts doing that and they go, oh, that's not fair. You can't use state power to influence the way a country buys stuff. That's not right. It's just the Marshall Plan. As I've said before, the Belt and Road is just China's version of the Marshall Plan.
Can I just...
Except they're better at it. Turns out communists are better at capitalism than the pure capitalists are, but I'll get to that.
Just a quick question, and not that I expect you to have all the answers at your fingertips, but when we start shipping jobs over to China, was that I think it was the 70s, I can't remember exactly, but didn't anybody ever anticipate, 4 or 5 or 12 steps down the road? Well, one day if we're making everything over there because it's cheaper, then there'll be these big producers. And I don't know, I would just, and maybe that's an oversimplified question. And if it is, I apologize, but did no one, at least for a second, to go, hey, why, with all these jobs going over there, isn't this going to come back and bite us in the ass in some shape and form at some time in the future? Does that make sense?
It does. And you're right. There's the right questions. Like the simple questions are always the right questions
That's all I
to
can
ask. Right? I know. But they are the right questions to ask. And the answer is some people did, but no one listened to them.
They were making money.
So China just didn't appear out of nowhere as the world's factory. The US spent decades deliberately turning them into it. And their allies, of course, but it's mostly the United States. Yeah. Why did they do it? Well, there was a range of reasons. Partly it was because of the Cold War. Now, as you and I know, but some people may not know, the fact that Russia was communist and China was communist didn't mean that they got along very well. They had a lot of disagreements. There was a lot of struggles for power. The guys in Moscow from Stalin onwards thought that all communist countries should shut up and listen to what Moscow tells them to do. They they started this fucking thing and they should be the boss of global communism. And the Chinese, after Mao won the Civil War, and the whole point of communist China was to make sure that they never got bitch slapped by foreign powers ever again, was get fucked. We're not listening to anyone. No one gets to tell us what to do ever, ever, ever again. We are going to become the greatest country on earth. Just sit back and watch, hold our beer while we do this. So there was a lot of tension between them, and Mao in his later years tried to bridge the gap with the West, opened the door when Nixon was in the White House. Nixon and Kissinger started this new dialogue with China under Mao, as has often been said. Only Nixon could go to China. Because he couldn't be accused of being soft on communism. So it was able to be framed in a Cold War era-esque narrative. And then when Deng Xiaoping gradually took over in the 70s until he was premier in the late 70s, finally, they were able to convince the USA under Nixon and then successive governments up into through Carter and onwards, Ford and then Carter, that the US would be better off having China as their ally.
Right.
Dong was able to play the whole thing. Well, we want to be a friend, but we could just go and do a deal with the Soviets. And so the US really wanted to. They thought they could weaken the Soviet Union if they could get China in their camp, and it would piss off the Soviet Union as well. It was, Dong had watched The Godfather, and he knew that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. He used that line over and over and over, and they kind of bought into it. So that thawed China-US relations in the 70s. It was partly based on Cold War era logic. Let's pull them away from the Soviet Union and make them our ally and weaken international communism. But part of that process was what Dong said was, well, what we want for that is we want you to help us rebuild our economy, rebuild our education system. So he started sending thousands and thousands of Chinese students to America to study at American schools and universities and business colleges and places like that, and then started inviting American businesses to come to China to teach us the ways of Western capitalism. We love
it.
What you guys are doing.
Love it, Jerry.
What they're doing in Japan, what they're doing in South Korea.
Give us some.
Singapore. We love it. Love it. We love it. We want more of it.
Right.
So they wanted more trade, and they wanted their economy built up, and they wanted the US support. The US wanted to do it. Now, the US had a couple of motivations for this. Partly they saw China as this vast, untapped foreign market that they could get in. They've been trying to get into, as people may recall, if you've listened to our Cold War series and the economics series that we did and the open door policy series that we did, the whole idea of free trade was driven by the United States in the late 1800s because of China. The US was blocked from having access to the Chinese market in the late 1800s, late 19th century, mostly by the UK that had fought the Opium Wars in order to control China's market and, had their own trading bloc. And the US had access to it, but it was limited access. And the US was trying to destroy all of the global trading blocs because the US was going through a recession every decade because they were making a lot of shit, but they couldn't sell it all to their domestic market. They'd run out of market. They needed international markets, but the British had their trading bloc, and the Germans had their trading bloc, and the French had their trading bloc, and everyone had their trading blocs going back to the good old days. And so World War I and World War II, essentially the purpose of World War I and World War II was to destroy trading blocs. It was battles over trading blocs. And, we all remember, you and I do anyway, the famous meeting between Roosevelt and Churchill before the US was involved in the war, the Atlantic Charter meetings, early 1941, I think, maybe August, so I can't remember the exact date, where basically they sat down, private tete-a-tete, Churchill's asking for help in the war, and Roosevelt says, well, I'll help you, but here's what I want.
You're not going to like.
When we together win the war, you dismantle the British Empire. Dismantle all of your colonies, all of your trading bloc. Churchill was like, fuck you. Roosevelt was like, no money then. Sorry, can't help. Churchill eventually said, okay. And it was like fucking pissed. But that was the beginning of the dismantling of the British Empire. Turns out they were broke anyway after World War II. They couldn't afford it even if they wanted to, but still. So it was all about dismantling the trading blocs, and the US had been trying to get access to China forever. And then the Civil War happened. They were blocked out, et cetera, et cetera. So the US businesses and political leaders saw it as an opportunity to get access to the Chinese market. But Deng Xiaoping was smart. Like, he wasn't just going to let capitalists come in and run rampant.
Right. He knows better.
So, yes, they wanted a transfer of knowledge to take place for any Western business that came to the US. So the deal has always been, and continues to be to this day, you can come and set up your Coca-Cola factory. You can come and set up your General Motors factory. You can come and set up your iPhone factory. But it's going to be a joint venture between you and a Chinese company. And the Chinese government is going to have oversight of everything that goes on. And you are going to transfer your intellectual property to that Chinese business as part of the deal to get to play in China. You want access to our market? That's fine. Here's what you need to give up. You need to give up transfer of IP. And you need to train and teach our people how to do what you do.
But that's what the Americans call unfair. It's like, if you're not willing to toe the line, then don't come here. But we want our cake and eat it too. Sorry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. No, you're right. And you still hear that argument. Well, it's unfair. It's
intellectual property. It's mine.
We're like, no, it's just smart. It's good business. The Chinese were like, hey, you want access?
How bad do you want it?
You're like, it's like a sexy chick who's way above your league saying, you want to tap this, you got to put a ring on it. Like, it's smart, right? That's what China said.
Yes.
You want to tap this, you got to put a ring on it. And American businesses went, fuck yes. And American governments, bipartisan, went, good deal. Like, give it away. Who cares? Like, China's never going to be a threat. Doesn't matter. And so I think there's an element of racism, an element of colonial thinking in there. They're never going to be a serious threat. They're Chinese, Vance. Right? They're barbarians. What are they going to do? Yeah.
Jeez.
So that was part of it. So they wanted to get access to the market. They didn't really. The initial plan wasn't to build it cheaply and export it to America. They wanted to just sell stuff to the Chinese. They wanted to build it there, sell it there, because it cuts down on shipping costs and all of that kind of stuff. But over time, they were making American cars and they were making Coca-Cola and Nike shoes and iPhones and whatever. And it was cheaper to produce them there. They were like, well, I mean, it's cheaper to produce them there. We could just sell them back home. What do we need factories in America for? Paying American wages and American insurance, and we have to abide by American laws and human rights and employee rights and all that. Unions, fuck that bullshit. We don't have to deal with that. We'll just get it all manufactured in China, skip all of the bullshit. It's just bottom line. And we're selling stuff cheaper to the American people. We're going to keep a lot of it as profit, but it's going to be cheaper goods. Great for America. Great for Americans. They get stuff cheap. Everyone's happy. So that, then they started to become not just domestically focused in China, but it was an international focus. And then businesses in America were also using the argument, well, I have to offshore my manufacturing to China because if I don't, my competitor will, and then they'll have a product that's cheaper than mine, and I'll get driven out of the market. I'll have to fire all of my employees anyway. So I might as well just fire them today and offshore it to America
or not hire them at all.
They'll get other jobs,
It's another version of whataboutism. Look, if I do it and he doesn't, he wins, so I have to do it. What are you going to do? So, it makes sense from a certain point of view.
And during this period, it started in the 70s, but really started to take steam in the 80s and then into the 90s. And Clinton really, when he was president, pushed hard for complete normalization of relationship with China. After Tiananmen Square, some Americans were like, "Oh, we shouldn't be doing stuff." Human rights record, blah, blah. They had most favored nation status, and it was on like an annual renewal. And Clinton pushed through this initiative to decouple China's human rights record from their most favored nation status. He was like, "Listen, let's ignore human rights issues. What's really important is trade." And there was also this rationale, this mindset, and it still sort of exists today to a large extent. If we can raise the Chinese standard of living,
Right.
they will eventually liberalize as a country, and the people, as they get more money, will get more education. As they get more education, they'll want democracy,
Cycle.
and they will become a democratic country. It'll be good for them in the long run. It's good for China.
Yes. Good
Like,
for us.
It's good for China, good for democracy. They'll be part of our economic camp forever. It'll be great. It'll be all
Kumbaya.
good. You just trust me on this. The more money they get, the more democracy they're going to want to have. Now, there's still some people who think that China is a capitalist country. People who haven't studied this, you read about it all the time in the Western media, and people fall for it.
Right.
China is not a capitalist country. State capitalism is not pure capitalism. And again, I've gone over this a million times on our shows over the years, but for people listening for the first time, I'll explain communism in 30 seconds. If you go back and you read Marx and Engels, the sort of path that they envisioned to get from early capitalism to communism there was a trajectory that countries needed to go through. They needed to go through a capitalist phase for a certain amount of time to build up their education, literacy rates. You need to have an educated population who know how to do shit. You also need basic infrastructure to run a modern country. You need factories, and you need roads, and you need educational infrastructure. Eventually you need electricity. It wasn't really a thing in Marx and Engels' day to a large extent, but you need electricity. You need telephone systems. You need the internet. You need all of the banking systems. You need all of this infrastructure in place. Then, once you had used capitalism to raise the standard of living, where you'd taken care of poverty, you'd taken care of the basic needs, society was running, it was profitable, everything was going well, then you go into the socialist phase.
Right.
Socialism is where the people have control of the engines of production. It's not in the hands of private ownership. It's the dictatorship of the proletariat. The people have control. You still have a state you still have a state.
Right.
You still have governments to manage how the economy is going to work and how the political systems are going to work. But it's for the people, by the people in a true sense. There's not private control of capitalism, money in the hands of people that get to then determine. See, the problem with pure capitalism, as we're seeing play out in late-stage capitalism in the U.S., is when enough people get enough money, they're able to buy the political power, they're able to buy media power, they're able to buy legislative power, get rid of regulations that don't suit them, put in regulations that hurt their political and business enemies if they want. And it all devolves into just basically an oligarchy and returns to a state of feudalism. You want to prevent that by having state control of what capitalists can and can't do. We already have that in the West to a certain extent, but it's flawed. It's not governed with any sort of set ideology. It's corruptible.
Absolutely.
Well, everything's corruptible, but it's more easily corruptible.
Working for the 1%. Or the way I like to think of it is some people are rich enough to go to space. Some people will never be able to buy a home. That's my commentary. Sorry.
Yeah. Just call them podcasters. And then once you get through the socialist phase, then you get to the communist phase, which is where you don't need a state anymore. People are just running their own thing. People have developed the skills to run their own organizations, communes. People are living as advanced communes. Everyone's taken care of. Everyone's needs are met. You don't need a state hierarchy governing, managing things anymore. It's self-sufficient.
It's that,
That was sort of the vision, but Marx and Engels didn't stipulate how you go from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3. They were like, you guys work it out. Every country's going to be different.
Exactly.
Every country's already at different stages of evolution.
Yeah.
You go work it out and let us know how it goes. So when there were early experiments with socialism/communism in the early 20th century, in Russia and the other Soviet countries, and then in China and Cuba and Vietnam and North Korea, et cetera, they were not communism. They were run by communist parties, but communism is the end point. It's not where you start. But most of those countries had barely made it to the Industrial Revolution. They had very low rates of literacy, very poor, hadn't been through an advanced capitalist phase. They didn't have infrastructure in place, all of that kind of stuff. And they didn't trust capitalists. So they tried to jump straight from sort of early capitalism or late feudalism. You know, the fucking Russians had only gotten rid of their serfs like a decade or two earlier. They were trying to jump straight from feudalism to socialism, straight over the optimism hurdle. China had just got rid of their emperors, you know, part of the Civil War, et cetera, et cetera. They tried to skip the whole capitalist phase. They're like, we got this. We can figure this out. But of course, it's in an era with no electricity, no telephones, no computers, no internet. The ability to centrally organize a very large country in most of those cases. Russia, huge. China, geographically huge. Population's huge. Literacy low. Population huge. It couldn't be done. They bit off more than they could chew. It was very, very ambitious. They tried to move very, very quickly because they had to, because the Western capitalist powers were going to try and crush their socialist experiment because they didn't want it to happen. They didn't want it to succeed. So they kind of quickly ramp up their education, ramp up their infrastructure, ramp up their economy, whilst at the same time spending a shit ton of money on military because they had to defend themselves against invasions from Germany and the UK and the USA and Japan and whatever. And it didn't work. And it got corrupted and it failed. They bit off more than they could chew and it was a disaster. And Deng Xiaoping recognized that. I've read biography on Deng Xiaoping in the last few years. Deng, all along, was like, this isn't going well. And we fucked this up. He was very, very as transparent as you could be in the days of the Cultural Revolution. He got punished. He got in a lot of trouble. He got sent into exile for 10 years and stuff, et cetera, et cetera. But he was like, we fucked it up. It was a good idea, but we didn't execute very well. Mao was a good leader to get us here, but he fucked up the execution of the second phase.
Yeah, the follow through.
So when Deng got into power, he was like, okay, you need to go back a step to go forward 2 steps. We need to go back and we need to invite the capitalists into our country to help us build the infrastructure. But we're not going to let them get their hands on power. That's the thing. So they call it socialism with Chinese characteristics. And it's like, we're going to allow elements of capitalism in, but we're going to tightly control what they can and what they can't do. We'll let them make money. We'll let them get rich. We'll let them, build stuff and, wave flags. Woo, I'm so rich. Until a certain point, and then we'll go, shut the fuck up, get back in line.
Right.
Okay. You will be allowed to have a certain amount of capitalism, but not too much capitalism. We're going to draw the line at what's allowable and what's not allowable. Because at the end of the day, this is for the people.
Serves a purpose.
Now, you can believe or not believe. I've been reading an interesting book for the last couple of months. It's a dense academic tome called, let me get the full title here because it's complicated. I've been reading lots and lots of books on China, as you know. This one's called The Socialist Economic Development in the 21st Century, a Century After the Bolshevik Revolution, by Alberto Gabriele and Elias Jabbour. It's published by the Routledge Giappicelli Studies in Business and Management. Very dense economic term, but it's just sort of talking about where socialism is today and, looking at China and asking questions about, well, how socialist is it? And they're taking an academic position on how to determine them. So They introduced bits of capitalism into China in order to help them grow. Americans got access to it, thought that it would make China capitalist and democratic, but it didn't.
Right.
Although you can argue that China has democracy, it's just a different kind of democracy. It's a one-party democracy. Yeah, we've talked about that before. Now, some people did fight against it in the US. The AFL-CIO, the UAW, United Steelworkers, some politicians like House Democratic leader Richard Gephardt, a young Nancy Pelosi, Al Gore for a while. They pushed back for a variety of reasons, environmental reasons, human rights reasons, and also employers protecting American jobs reasons, of course, from the unions. But no one listened to them because there were very powerful bipartisan lobby groups that were very well funded, very well connected, that made sure that there were no restrictions over time on how much business American companies could offshore to China.
Gotcha.
And this went through lots of different eras. Like there was different attempts at Congress in the early 80s to there was what they called the textile wars in the early 80s, American manufacturers in the South. Companies like Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett's company he took over, which had been a textiles manufacturer for like 100 years, was suffering. I mean, they were suffering in the 60s when he took it over in 1963, but these textile manufacturers were suffering because China was exporting to the US cheaper textiles, cheaper fabrics, and American manufacturers were trying to get Congress to put tariffs on Chinese textiles, and Reagan vetoed it and shut it down. He was like, well, that's protectionism. I don't believe in protectionism.
How much of the Republicans have changed?
And then they kept trying.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. They kept trying Congress kept trying to push this through. Reagan kept stopping it. Then Bush Sr. stopped it. Bush Sr. also said, we don't believe in protectionism. That's tariffs. Tariffs are bad, okay? We're not going to do that. He shut it down. Then, as I said, Clinton pushed for like completely deep-throating China. It was bipartisan, right? It was right across the board for decades in the 80s and the 90s. Everyone wanted to see China be big and successful because it was going to be great for America and great for American consumers, cheaper goods. And there was also this rationale as well that, well, yes, people are going to lose jobs, but they're shitty jobs working in factories. Who wants to work in a factory? It's a shitty job. They'll go get retrained and they'll get a better job, or their kids will get better jobs, and they'll have more money because stuff is going to be cheaper, and then they'll have more cash to splash and lifestyles will be better, and they'll be able to, you don't need money because everything's going to be cheap. It's going to be great. It's going to be a golden era.
Yeah.
But and then Americans lost their jobs, middle-class jobs that were well-paying jobs because there were unions that were driving pay and that kind of stuff for these jobs. Got eradicated. The corporations, there were cheaper goods, but corporations kept a lot of profit. They used that profit to pay legislators to enact more legislations to entrench their profits. Reagan simultaneously said, no, protectionism is bad, and including in that is unions, which were protecting workers, so destroyed unions. And then decades of weakening unions, destroying unions. So American workers got fucked by both political parties who not only allowed this to happen, but encouraged it and pushed for it to happen.
Absolutely.
Over decades and decades. And if you look at this argument that it'll all work out well for American workers, if you look at the unemployment rate, you could make that argument. Unemployment in 1980 was about 7 to 8%.
Right.
Today, it's around 3 to 4%. So, wow, halved unemployment in that period. That's great. Things are going well. But not that not that much when you break it down. So if you look at wages have more or less been stagnant since 1980.
Oh, yes.
Unless you look at employer paid benefits in the US. That's not a thing here, really, because we pay for we get free healthcare, and we are a civilized country. But in uncivilized countries like the US, you have to rely on employer paid benefits. If you tack that on, the full benefit to employees has gone up, I think, by about 50 odd % in the last 50 years, which is not keeping pace with inflation. But a large part of that you don't actually get to see. You might get a healthcare card in your wallet paid for by your employer if you're lucky, but you know that only goes a certain
I'm still paying.
And
yeah.
Go to hospital, you're still going bankrupt. So people are not better off than they were 50 years ago. If you look at household incomes in the US, they're higher than they were 50 years ago, but a lot of that is attributable to people working more than one job, two income earners in the family, whereas in 1980 it was more likely to be one income earner. People are working more jobs, more hours at existing jobs if they have them. So people are working more, earning less. They've been fucked over to a large extent as a result. So it didn't work out really. Poverty is slightly lower. Stuff got cheaper, TV, computers, food. Well, I think food has gone up in the US in recent years from my experience going over there.
Yeah.
But a lot of things got cheaper, but services, the cost of services went up in the US to compensate. Housing, college, healthcare, all the sectors where supply is legally throttled got more and more expensive. And some things were subsidized, but other things got way more expensive. Meanwhile, you had corporate executives like Carly Fiorina. You remember her?
The name.
She used to be the CEO of Hewlett-Packard, and then she ran for the White House at one point. She said decades ago, there is no job that is America's God-given right anymore.
Thank you.
John Thompson, who was the CEO of Symantec Corp, said U.S. corporations' first responsibility is to their shareholders. You cannot say, I'm going to put national interests ahead of shareholder interests. And what was in the best interest of shareholders was profit. And what was the best way to get profit? Fuck over American workers and offshore the jobs to China.
Again and again and again. Yeah. And that hasn't changed. And that's still the mantra today. Well, I'm responsible. I'm liable to the shareholders, which justifies practically anything I want or need to do.
Yeah, and that's the way the system has been set up. Meanwhile, the U.S.A. is complaining about Chinese imports while protecting their own industries. And there's a long history of that. I said there was this textile wars in the early 1980s. American government was trying to support the American textile industry by putting tariffs on China's textiles. Reagan shut it down, as I said. In the late 1980s, the Economic Policy Institute did a study which found that 5.1 million jobs had been lost to foreigners, 60% of them in manufacturing and the remaining 40% to industries related to manufacturing. That was by the late 1980s.
Wow.
That's how quickly it happened in that 10-year sort of period from Deng Xiaoping onwards.
Or a better way to say it is that's how quickly the companies shipped those jobs over, and that's how quickly our government did not stop them or try to keep them here. So, yeah, there was money to be made, so it happened very quickly.
And then it was Clinton that pushed to get China into the World Trade Organization when it was set up. It was set up in the mid-90s. It was sort of like 2000, 2001 that Clinton, when he was still in power, was really pushing hard. He wrote a message to Congress in 2000 where he said, China, with more than 1 billion people, is home to the largest potential market in the world. If Congress makes the right decision, our companies will be able to sell and distribute products in China made by American workers on American soil. without being forced to relocate manufacturing to China, we will be able to export products without exporting jobs.
That sounds nice.
Yeah. So he pushed to get them in. Big business was furiously lobbying Congress at the same time to get them to agree to allow China into the World Trade Organization. The chairman of the Business Roundtable, a bunch of CEOs of American corporations, a guy called Robert Burt, said this historic legislation will be remembered as the key that opened the door for America to sell its products and services to the world's largest emerging marketplace.
Yeah.
And the legislation, when it went to Capitol Hill, passed 83-15.
Right.
Even in the House, where the Democrats were split on it, Clinton was able to get support from 3/4 of the Republicans, and it passed 237 to 197.
Jesus.
So
Yeah.
China joined the World Trade Organization in December 2001, just after 9/11.
Right. And of course, what no one, I mean, I'd like to think they were thinking about this, but as the years and the decades go by, China's making more things. They're just building up tons of money, and eventually they're going to have enough money where it's expendable. They're going to want to do something with it. They're going to invest it in several things. And that's when they truly become a powerhouse. And that's what, I guess, either makes the Americans nervous, or they're like, "Ooh, what did we do? Did we create a monster through our own greed?" Partially, yes.
Yeah, it's Frankenstein's
Yeah.
monster. Gee, if only somebody had written a story that warned us about fucking with
Don't
shit.
fuck with stuff you shouldn't fuck with. Yeah,
Right.
sorry.
Got a question
Yeah.
for you. In America, when a company sells a product at a price that's less than their competition, in order to build up a customer base and get brand loyalty, what's it called?
There's a specific term. I don't know. Is it undercutting? I'm not sure. Or is it just good? Okay.
Yeah. It's often called a loss leader.
There we go.
You sell something, you can even sell it cheaper than cost
Right.
if you want. Sell it very, very cheap. Build up a customer base. I remember back when I worked at Microsoft, we were competing against Netscape,
Oh, yes.
which was a web browser for the kids out there. And Microsoft had our own called Internet Explorer, which we gave away for free as part of Windows.
yeah.
They were selling Netscape for like $29.99. We gave it away for free.
Yeah. But you could afford to.
People got upset about that,
Yeah.
but we gave it away. In the West, if you give away a product for free in order to build up a customer base to destroy your competition, or to build up a customer base, whatever it's called, predatory pricing, it's usually considered good business practice. It's smart. It's called capitalism.
Yeah.
If you can afford it, if you have the money to sell something at a loss for a year or 2 years or 5
Savvy.
years in order to win a customer base, drive your competitors out of competition, that's capitalism. That's smart. We love capitalism.
We
That's
admire
brilliant.
that.
You're a business legend.
Yes.
And it's about, capitalism engenders, in theory, philosophy in the marketplace where companies are trying to build the best product for the lowest price so the consumer wins, and it's all good. Everyone's happy, and businesses should get applauded for building a better product at a lower price. And if you can drive your competitors out of business and corner the market and increase your profit margins, then you're a great business person. You might end up being accused of running a monopoly and antitrust. Be the toast of the town. You'll be on the front cover of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. You'll be a titan.
Yeah.
When China does exactly the same
Son of a
thing,
bitch.
it sells
Evil
cheap products
bastards.
to America. It's called dumping.
Oh, I like that. A negative connotation.
Why? They're using
bastards.
their ability to make stuff cheap to undercut our price and sell it in our market. That's not right.
It's not fair.
It's okay when we do it,
Smart.
but it's not. It's unfair when they do it.
Dastardly. Yeah.
people say, well, it's state supported. It's not fair because their government supports their manufacturers to sell stuff cheaply to our people.
Yeah.
Shouldn't you be thanking the Chinese government to helping you buy cheaper goods?
No, you're looking at it all wrong.
Thank you, China. Shouldn't you be congratulating the Chinese government for, wow, this product would have cost me $100. You're subsidizing it so I can get it for $50?
Yeah. Oh.
Fucking thank you, Chinese government. You're an absolute fucking
you're
legend.
A gem. Wow. There we go.
Yeah. Get down and kiss your feet.
You get a Christmas card. Yeah. But no.
People go, but that's not capitalism. That's state capitalism. Yes. And I'm here to argue state capitalism is better capitalism. It's smarter capitalism. That's what pisses people in America off, from businesses and governments. The fucking communists figured out how to do capitalism better than the capitalists did. They looked at it and went, yeah, okay, good, like it. Some things we'd change about it. We're going to fix it, bring it in, fix it, and then give it back to you. How do you like them apples?
No, don't change it. Oh, I like it the way it is.
Again, the Marshall Plan was America making American goods and services cheaper, more accessible to Western European countries than Soviet goods and services were. So the Western countries would buy American goods and products and not Soviet goods and products. America developed this business model, called it the Marshall Plan, said it was an act of aid. Oh, look, we're doing such a great job. We're making this stuff available to poor Europeans.
Oh, we're good guys.
China does it and says, look, we're doing such a great job. We're making our products and services available to poor Americans. And it's like, oh, that's bad. That's evil.
It is evil.
You know, well, when you do it, it's charitable. When China does it, it's evil. Like, pick a fucking story and stick to it.
Yeah.
By the way, in terms of tariffs, we all know that Trump's whole tariff story was a load of bullshit, and the calculations of it were something they pulled out of their ass. And according to the World Trade Organization, I mean, the US has always had tariffs on other countries, right? The US has tariffs, like every country has tariffs. Right. Data from the World Trade Organization shows that the United States had a trade-weighted average tariff of 2.2% in 2023.
Right.
So if you take all of the products that America buys and you weight it by the amount that they buy, you average it out, it's an average tariff of about 2.2% across everything. Okay. Some products have no tariff, some have a very high tariff, some have a small tariff, right? You average it out.
Yeah.
The European Union on average had a 2.7 tariff. Japan had 1.9%, Canada 3.4%, China 3%, Switzerland 1.7%.
Right.
So the US isn't the lowest, it's not the highest, it's somewhere in the middle of the developed world.
Yeah.
So countries often have higher rates on certain niche products like French cheese or Canadian dairy or Japanese rice, things that they want to protect. Because there's a huge amount of industry, it's very important to the country's livelihood, et cetera, et cetera. Right. The US does that too. 25% tariffs on light trucks coming in from abroad. It's called the chicken tax. That's still in place too. 160% tariffs on some peanuts.
Yeah.
And then there are massive hidden barriers in agriculture and defense and those sorts of things. So this whole they're ripping us off thing is a fairy tale. It's a weaponized fairy tale that Trump's made up. And anyone who tries to sell you that story is either doesn't know what they're talking about or is just full of shit trying to give you some spin story that does not hold up. And the real story is that the US elites designed this system. And they're upset not because the people are ripping them off, because the people got better at playing the game that the US established than the US was. So let's get back to the World Trade Organization.
Okay.
now that I've done that potted history. When the US had the chance to use the World Trade Organization to challenge China's trading policies and practices, it did, and it won nearly every time, nearly every single case. It won 20, it lost 0. There were a few split or pending, and China sued back and won a couple.
Right.
But the World Trade Organization ruled in favor of Washington time and time again against China.
Okay.
China generally complied with the rulings, or at least engaged with the process. You might argue that they were too slow, or they were too many gaps in their enforcement of intellectual property infringement or whatever. But basically, China played the game because it wanted to be part of the World Trade Organization. It didn't want to get kicked out. It didn't want penalties, et cetera, et cetera. But since the first Trump administration, and including the Biden administration, the US have blatantly violated World Trade Organization rules.
Right.
Including unilaterally imposing tariffs on China, as Trump did in his first term, as well as other trading partners, and came up with a whole bunch of discriminatory subsidies for things like electrical vehicles, clean energy, semiconductor industries, Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, and the Creating Helpful Incentives to Produce Semiconductors and Science Act, the CHIPS Act. These were blatant violations of the World Trade Organization because they were protectionist measures, which you're not allowed to do according to the World Trade Organization. The way the World Trade Organization was set up by the United States was you need to sit down with countries and negotiate through diplomacy tariffs. What are the tariffs are going to be, where and when and how much, and it's a slow, civilized process. You can't just start waving your hands in the air and designing tariffs.
Or put it on Twitter.
Or other subsidies and mechanisms and that kind of stuff.
Right.
And the WTO started penalizing the US for doing these things. Other countries were complaining about what the US was doing. The World Trade Organization ruled against the United States, and the United States was like, "Oh, fuck that! You're not allowed to. You're allowed to punish other people.
You
not
don't
us."
tell me no. Sorry.
Yeah. And they decided to shut it down.
Right.
So for people who don't know, and I didn't know a lot about this before I started researching this over the last month or so, the way that it works is if one country, say country X, has a problem with country Y's trading practices, they open a dispute process with the World Trade Organization. Right. And there's a whole system of where it goes through. A panel is established by World Trade Organization members to get hearings from both sides. There's sort of written submissions and hearings are held. All the WTO members then rule on it. They all get to have a say. And if they rule against a country, you got to cut that shit out. The country needs to fix their practices within a certain period of time. Right. If they don't do it, they can be penalized. There can be retaliations where tariffs will be set and approved by the World Trade Organization to penalize the company. It's all very civilized. It's all very grown
bring you back
up,
in line.
Right?
Yeah.
It's basically the economic equivalent of the United Nations.
Right.
Like we all get together, we all have a round table. It's democratic. We all have a discussion. We'll go, you know what? That's not cool. You're being a dick. We're gonna put measures into place to stop you from being able to do that until you curb your ways.
Yeah.
It's basically to stop people from running around doing their own thing, which is how, we all know, I've said this a gajillion times over the years, all wars are basically economic wars. Wars are always fought over money and resources. We dress them up in other things. We say, well, it's about religion or freedom or, whatever. But really, at the end of the day, if you goat see it open, you'll see that inside there, right up in the small intestine, really what's going on is somebody's after somebody else's shit. And we can't say that. well, we're going to go and invade this country because we want to take their shit. The days of that flying are long gone. You need to gussy it up.
Yeah.
It's putting lipstick on the pig.
Exactly.
If you're going to kiss the pig, you got to put some lipstick on it. And go, oh, it's a very pretty pig. Don't you love this pig? It's a beautiful pig. It's the greatest pig. It's a beautiful pig. A lot of people have told me it's the greatest pig they've ever seen. So,
Right.
but if country X opens a dispute against country Y and the World Trade Organization rule against country Y can appeal the
Makes
ruling
sense.
by going to the appellate court. The WTO has an appellate court. 7 judges called members. They serve a 4-year term. They can be reappointed once for a maximum of 8 years. But what happened was about 7 or 8 years ago, when Trump was first in power, some of these judges' terms were expiring and the WTO tried to replace them. And the US started blocking the appointments of appellate court judges.
Exactly. They just used their influence and said, why fight when you can just shut the process that supports it down? And it's the equivalent of printing up the pig. You don't want to be crass, but if I just do this, it's less confrontational and the thing will fall apart and you won't have to worry about it.
So what has happened in the last 8 years or so is no judges have been appointed to the appellate court when the old judges' terms have expired. Because every member has a veto.
Yes.
There's no vote if one country says no. It's like, okay, that's it. You can't appoint a judge. And the US has just said no to every candidate for a judge, including through the Biden administration. So again, it's a bipartisan thing. So now when the WTO passes a ruling and says, okay, United States of America, cut that shit out, the US just appeals to the appellate court. But there's no one on the appellate court. There's one judge remaining and you have to have a minimum of 3.
Yeah.
So they can't do shit. So it goes into the void. So you have these appeals now that have just gone into the void. No one can do shit about it. And they just sit there. Nothing happens. And the US goes, well, I appealed it. You can't do shit. We're just going to keep doing it.
I think I read somewhere that the last time that the appellate body was able to review appeals was November 30th, 2020. So it's been a while. It's been a while. I mean, it's a brilliant move by the Americans, but obviously we're doing it for selfish reasons, which goes back to what Trump can do because he can do tariffs, not tariffs, stall tariffs, whatever. The complaints against it are going to go nowhere because of the very actions that we have been taking, Democrats and Republicans alike. It's cruel, but it's brilliant.
So there was a number of things that led to this. It was a sort of a slow burn over years. And again, this was happening in bipartisan administrations. The US was doing something called zeroing for anti-dumping cases where they believed that countries were dumping, again, selling cheap products into America. They had a thing called zeroing where they would apply tariffs to products to zero them out. The WTO ruled that was a violation of WTO rules. They had to cut it out. The US lost over a dozen of those cases. They basically, the US then said, WTO judges can't rule on this. It's outside of your bailiwick. But, the WTO said, well, no, we're an organization. We've decided we can do this.
We're here. Yeah.
The US law also treats China as what they call a non-market economy, meaning it doesn't use China's actual prices and costs in trade disputes, which led to higher duties. The WTO ruled against the US's approach to dealing with China. The US saw this as the World Trade Organization siding with China. It says that it's state-led distortion, which is true, but it's bullshit because the US does state-led stuff all the time. The complaint that China's government supports its industries by doing stuff is, it's if they can do it within the World Trade Organization's rules, then it's, as Nixon said, well, if the president does it, then it must be legal. If it's legal within the WTO rules, then it's fine, right?
That's fair.
America doesn't like it. WTO says what China does is fine. Yeah. America gets pissed off, does stuff. WTO says, hey, stop that. America gets upset. Yeah. There were subsidy disputes about Boeing versus Airbus. Both the US and the EU got penalized for that, were found guilty. The US hated the idea that Boeing was ruled against for receiving illegal subsidies. Mm-hmm. There was a case involving Russia that sort of, where the US was using national security justification to justify protectionism. This is in 2019. World Trade Organization ruled against that. Just general sort of frustration from the US's side of things about what they call judicial overreach and how long it took for judges sometimes to, or the appellate court to reach decisions. So basically the US decided, we don't like the way the WTO is working now. We're gonna break it. Yes. However, one final note on this. The world didn't just sit still and let the US fuck it up. So the US has fucked up the ability for the appellate court to function. Right. So the rest of the world went ahead and said, well, we'll just build another dispute resolution process, appeals resolution process. Dozens of countries, including the EU, China, and Australia, joined a thing called the Multi-Party Interim Appeal Arbitration Arrangement, the MPIA, which is basically a alternative form of the appellate court where you can, if there's a ruling against you, you can go to this appeal arbitration thing. It doesn't involve the US, and I think Turkey and Indonesia and the UK aren't part of it.
You got to start somewhere.
But nearly the rest of the world went, you know what, this is fucking bullshit. We need a resolution process, so we're going to go and build a new one to replace the one that the Americans fucked up.
Yeah.
But that's basically, my version. And again, as I always say, if anyone wants to disagree with me on the facts or my interpretation of the facts, come to me, but don't bring a knife to a gunfight. Come at me and tell me where and how you think I'm wrong. But the basic bottom line is this. China isn't being unfair to America. America built China to be what it is. Yeah. It's just that America thought that when China became this powerful, America would somehow be able to push them around. Turns out that they can't, and now America's pissed and is trying to take its bat and ball and go home.
Yes. Because
it built the rules to the game, and then the Chinese came along and figured out how to play the game better. Yeah. It's like America invented chess and won the World Chess Championship for 200 years, and then the Chinese developed an AI that figured out how to play chess better, and now they're winning all the games. And China and America's going, oh, that's not fair. And you go, well, is it in the rules that I can't do this? No, but sorry, we are now.
It's better.
Beating you at your own game.
The way I thought of it was America is having a swimming party for a couple of decades. Someone else comes along and does it better. So we drain the water out of the pool. Fuck you. We're not going to put up with this.
Yeah. Well, that's a very long episode on why the World Trade Organization is broken and why America's pissed at China. But, again, America, I've been saying this for a long time, American workers have a right to be pissed off, but be pissed off at the right people. It's not China that did this.
Exactly.
China's trying to help you. They're selling you cheap stuff because you're broke. It's American politicians and businesses that fucked you for decades.
Working together.
And I know that part of the argument for supporting Trump is that they think, well, Trump wasn't part of that because he wasn't part of the elite and he's going to fix everything because blah, 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 something. But that's bullshit. I mean, Trump is out for Trump. We could talk about all the deals that are being done by Don Jr., etc. Trump's just in there to line his own pockets. If you think Trump gives a shit about you, then you're a fucking moron. Seriously.
He doesn't care about his own kids.
If you think he cares about you.
I mean, he can't. He is beyond. No, seriously. Yeah, I mean, he can't. He can't care about other people. He certainly doesn't care about the average Jim Bob on the street. It's just not in him to do that. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
He's a billionaire who was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, has deliberately lived a life of gaudy excess his entire life. Is what he was known for before his White House bid was just gaudy excess luxury living. Tacky. Like, he's the guy who does not give a fuck. He'll send a business into bankruptcy to avoid paying employees and avoid paying debtors. He will fuck over contractors to avoid paying their bills. He's fucked over ex-wives. He'll fuck over anyone who gets in his way. And you think he cares about you? You're a fucking idiot. What kind of a fucking moron do you have to be to believe? I mean, you're a big enough fucking moron if you believe that Joe Biden gives a shit about you or whatever. If you think Trump gives a shit about you, that's just a level of stupidity that really you need to check yourself into a fucking mental health clinic. Couple of quick stories I want to touch on. India and Pakistan.
Right.
What's it all about?
Yeah.
The real story. If we have time and they haven't gone into full nuclear by the time we do our next show, we can touch in it. But the biggest story here is India and Pakistan and who supplies them with military.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, as I said earlier, all wars are about money. The India-Pakistan war is largely being driven by their respective military suppliers. India was very cozy with Russia, the Soviet Union and Russia. They were sort of non-aligned for a large part after their independence from England in the late 1940s. Increasingly, they've become closer to the US. They used to buy all of their weapons from Russia, a lot of their weapons from Russia. When the sanctions kicked in over the Ukraine war, they started to buy more weapons from the United States and their allies, which again is the whole reason for the Ukraine war. The reason the US engineered the war in Ukraine is so they could get shit by coming up with a justification for putting sanctions on Russia so they could get into Russia's markets. India's military industrial complex was one of them. Pakistan has been closer to the United States for decades since its original partition, partially because India was close to the Soviet Union. Remember, America used Pakistan in the 1970s to train the Islamic fundamentalists, the Mujahideen, including Osama bin Laden, to destabilize Afghanistan, which was pro-Soviet at the time, to force the Soviets to come and intervene, which led to the Russian invasion, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, although it wasn't an invasion really because they were invited in by the Afghani government repeatedly over the course of a couple of years. Please come and help us fight these American-trained Muslim fundamentalists.
And more recently when we were...
most Americans...
Sorry, go ahead. Oh, and more recently, we were good with Pakistan because we were using them for the more current war that ended with Biden and Afghanistan. So again, they served a purpose, but now that the Afghan war, the latest one, is over, we didn't need them so much. We backed off, and so Pakistan, like most smaller countries, is going to go looking for a different benefactor, if you will.
Well, they're also a Muslim country, and, post 9/11, America's there's never really been very friendly with Muslim countries outside of Saudi Arabia. But then Osama bin Laden was found living next door to the Pakistani military headquarters. And, I still don't believe that America didn't know he was there all along, and the Pakistanis knew he was there all along. But anyway, whatever. If he was in fact there, and if in fact they did catch and kill bin Laden. I haven't seen proof of death, so I'm not taking anything on face value. Right. But Pakistan's become closer to China, is the bottom line, in the last 20 years. So there's been a changing of alignment in that country. Kashmir and the water supply and all of that is an issue. Kashmir, when the partition happened, Kashmir was quasi-independent, really, and then the Indians sort of took control of Kashmir, even though it has a large Muslim population. It's always been sort of a disputed region. But obviously the big problem with this conflict is they're both nuclear powers, and neither country has a very stable, rational government. So you just got to hope that shit doesn't get too far out of hand.
That's okay. We got Trump.
Ukraine.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that's great. The Ukraine story is that Trump and Zelensky finally signed the minerals deal, which Trump wanted. Obviously, again, just to repeat it, all wars are about money and resources and control, and the US had been trying to remove Ukraine from the Russian orbit for decades. There were 2 coups in Ukraine in 2004 and 2014 that were at least partially engineered and supported by the United States, because they were replacing pro-Russian governments with pro-Western, pro-NATO governments. The US wanted to get their grubby little hands on Ukraine for a bunch of reasons, partly to weaken Russia's economic markets, get access to the gas and supply of weapons to Ukraine, but also to get access to these minerals, rare earth minerals that are desperately needed by the West, because China controls 90% of the rare earth minerals today. And in return for some sort of continued support by the United States, Zelensky has agreed to sign a minerals agreement. So the negotiation of peace there is probably going to get dragged out even further, which will lead to more senseless deaths. But America doesn't give a shit about how many Ukrainians and Russians die, as long as the American elites get access to money and rare earth minerals. The war can go on forever. And the last story I wanted to touch on briefly was the Act Blue. So a week or so ago, it was announced that Trump directs Justice Department to investigate Act Blue, Democrats' cash engine. The president ordered an inquiry into Act Blue, the main Democratic fundraising platform, in his latest move using the government to target political opponents. The Act Blue, for people around the world who don't know what it is, it's a fundraising platform that powers virtually every Democratic candidate and cause. So obviously the play here is to cripple campaign funding for the Democrats in the lead up to the midterms. I fully expect that Trump and Musk and the rest of the MAGA crowd will be trying to make it as difficult as possible for the midterms to go ahead. There'll be a range of mechanisms that I expect that they will apply, whether it's trying to do things like this, destroy their ability to raise campaign financing, or declare some sort of national emergency, state emergency, use every trick in the book to avoid a free and fair midterm, because there's no way, as far as I'm concerned, Trump is ever going to allow himself to be removed from power.
He's going to try, absolutely.
Because he knows what the consequences will be. He, all of the lawsuits and then some will be back. So he is, if he's at all sane and rational, he is not going to allow that to happen.
Yeah. All the institutions of America,
by hook or by crook.
all the institutions of America are soon to be tested by Trump. We'll see what happens.
That's the bullshit filter for the month of May. May the Norse gods look down favorably upon us all.